Hi, I'm Miss Tyler, and welcome to Context for Kids. And this week we've got a special teaching. I thought that I really ought to explain why I teach what I teach. After all, I'm teaching that there was a man who was born of a virgin who preached and lived among the Jewish people as a Jew, obviously, that he was genetically from the line of David, but he was also an heir to the kingly line of David, that he was crucified, and that he was buried, and he resurrected 3 days later, and that many people saw him. Well, that's a big claim. And a lot of people will tell you, and a lot of people who claim to be believers will tell you that Yeshua, or Jesus Christ, well, he was just a really good man. And he taught some really great things. But he never said he was divine. He never said he was God. He never said any of that stuff. However, as we're going to go through this year, when we look at context, you'll see that whenever he said that he was the Son of Man, he was making exactly that claim, because that was what Son of Man meant. Son of Adam, Son of Enoch, Son of Man, totally different than Son of David. And Son of David, of course, is the heir to the kingly line. Son of Man, all those others are referring to the second divine figure that we see in, oh gosh, is it Daniel 9 or Daniel 7? There I go. I'm really tired this morning. But, all that is beside the point. First, was Yeshua, Jesus Christ, a real person? Because there are people who will even say he wasn't that. Well, we know from the ancient Roman historian Josephus, who was, he was a Jew, and he was from the priestly line. Well, he not only wrote about Yeshua, but he also wrote about John the Baptist. Matter of fact, he loved John the Baptist. He had nothing but good to say about him. He also talked about Yeshua, Jesus, and he spoke nicely about him. He certainly didn't say that he was a figment of everyone's imagination. No, he was an accepted historical person by Josephus, who was born just a few years after his death and resurrection. Okay, so there's that. But let's look further. In between 200 and 600 AD, the commentaries on the Mishnah, it's half of the Talmud, they were compiled, and they freely admit that yes, this man absolutely existed. Now, some of them said some insulting things about him. They thought he was a magician. But you know what? They didn't accept him as Messiah. So what else are they supposed to think? I don't hold it against them. And, they weren't being treated very nicely by some of the early Christians. So, there's that. Okay? So we have to look at the source. We also have to consider what the mindset was when we're evaluating what they're saying. But what neither Josephus nor the rabbis who wrote the Gemara commentaries, what no one disputes is that he was a real person. Jews today don't dispute whether they believe in him or not, that he's the Messiah. They don't dispute that he was a real life person. It's just not even questioned. Now, the second accusation is just that he was a really great guy who taught some things, but you know what, with the claims he made? If he wasn't right, he was either crazy or a liar. But even beyond that, because we want to talk about that, as we keep going through the New Testament. Beyond that, one of the things that I study, I study ancient Near Eastern and first century and the first few centuries after context of the world. And anyone who studies those things will see that there was a marked difference before the death of Yeshua and after the death of Yeshua. A difference that cannot be explained away by a really good guy who taught some really cool stuff. Let me tell you, in the Roman Empire, I was just talking to my friend Ryan White yesterday, and he was talking about how in the Roman Empire and throughout the world, poverty was extreme for the overwhelming majority of people, and that's just the way it had always been in the world. You know, the rich had a lot. I mean, 3% of people owned 95% of the land. And they had control of all that food. And a lot of it was being, you know, it wasn't being handed out to the poor. There were no, you know, food relief societies. There was no welfare. There were no food stamps. If you weren't a landowner or lucky enough to be a slave in like a Roman household, you weren't getting fed. You were a beggar. You were lower than low. No one was going to take care of you. This is the reality of the ancient world. Life was cheap. Matter of fact, the first one who brought forth the idea that life wasn't cheap, other than, you know, just in the garden, was God to Moses at Mount Sinai, where he created a kingdom right there, you know, that said that everyone gets treated alike in terms of the law, that you are required to help your neighbor, you are required to feed the poor, widow, orphan, those people who were just written off by the rest of the world. This wasn't just a good idea that some clever guy named Moses came up with, because back there in the ancient world, if it hadn't been commanded by God, it wouldn't have gotten done. No one would have done it. If you were poor, it was because you deserved to be poor. If you were rich, it was because you had the God's favor. But in the Bible, it's not like that. In the Bible, it's, excuse me, but every man, woman, and child is required to act like a righteous king in the ancient Near East. They're required to take care of the least of these, the people who had no honor in the rest of the world. Okay, but that only stayed confined to the Jewish people. And here we go, and you know, and after they were exiled, when they stopped doing those things, and God finally got sick of them, and he exiled them, you know, and first they were under the rule of the Babylonians before God brought them back to the land. Then they were under the rule of the Medes and Persians, who actually did allow them to go back to the land of Israel. Then they were under the Greeks, under the Seleucids and the Ptolemies, and the horrible fighting that was going on, and they were, you know, at center stage. Then the Romans, which we're going to be talking about over the next couple weeks in our lessons. These were brutal empires who didn't value human life. Well, Romans valued the life of a Roman citizen, but no one else, okay? But God made a system where everyone was to be treated with dignity. He did. You know, so we got this world that existed before the death of Yeshua, and it was cruel and brutal, and almost all of it, probably 99% of it at least, was polytheistic. They worshiped multiple gods. As a matter of fact, they thought that the Jews were atheists because they didn't see how on earth believing in one God was even possible. How could one God do everything? And more importantly, how could the God that looks over Rome possibly be the God who's already been defeated over with the Greeks? It's impossible. Gods were territorial. They were regional. They looked after their own people and battled against the people from other lands. You know, if there were treaties, they were temporary. It was a dog-eat-dog world. But something happened when Yeshua rose from the dead. Something amazing. Now, first it just happened with the Jews, and for 10 years, that was it. You know, they were all gathered at the temple, at Pentecost, which is the Greek name for Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks. That's 50 days after First Fruits, which was the day that Yeshua resurrected from the dead. So they're all it says that they were all in one place and in one accord praying. Well, what were they doing? They were praying at the temple on the day of Shavuot. They were praying the Amidah prayers. They were in one accord praising God and worshiping Him. And then all of a sudden, fire comes down from heaven. And the Holy Spirit alights on all of these Jews. Like 120 of them, and they start speaking in different languages, and people are astounded. And then Peter, I believe it was, he starts saying, yeah, it's Peter, he starts saying, hey, why are you guys all surprised? This is happening because the Messiah has come. He was crucified by the Romans. The chief priest turned him over, sent him there because they were corrupt. And we're all, and they're going, brothers, what can we do? They saw the miracle right there in the temple. They were, everybody was there. That's why they were commanded to gather 3 times a year. They were going to see this happen. And thousands of converts were coming in. And, at one point it's believed that 20% of Jews in the Roman Empire were believers in Yeshua as Messiah. Now that's huge. That's 1 out of every 5. That's amazing. That's amazing. And they lived as Jews, and they were in the synagogues alongside Jews who did not believe, except for when Paul got kind of irritated and he was having them arrested and everything. But that's kind of a complicated story that they will go into in a couple of years. I don't know. We'll see. But after that, the message of the gospel was spreading to Jews all over the Roman Empire. It was catching like wildfire. 1 out of every 5 Jews is a huge number. And like I said, they were there in the synagogues, and they were reasoning in the synagogues, and converts were being made all the time. And the people's lives were changing. And a lot of them, yeah, there were signs and wonders happening, and there were miracles. But you know what? That's not even the most amazing thing. That's not the proof, because, yeah, they can write that happened. We can't see it, but I'll tell you what we can see. Was before Yeshua was resurrected, before the Holy Spirit came down en masse upon the believers in Him, the world was a polytheistic world. But when Peter went to the house of Cornelius in response to that dream in Acts 10, and he wasn't a Jew, and at that point they didn't believe that a non-Jew could receive the Spirit and could be a believer. They thought that this was only for the Jews. This is 10 years later, Sure, we read the Gospels now, we go, well, it was obviously there. Well, everything's obvious in retrospect, even in our own lives, But Peter went there. The Holy Spirit fell upon his entire family. It said they were Ger Tzaddik. They were commandment keepers. They were people who followed God but had not formally converted to Judaism. The Holy Spirit came down on his entire family. And after that, things just went crazy. And the Gentiles started coming to faith in Yeshua, and they gave up polytheism. Sometimes, someone, when there was the only person in their family. That's insane. That had never happened before in the history of the world. You did, in dyadic social groups, that's the kind of social groups that they had in the ancient world, community-based. People didn't go off on their own, but people were going off on their own in pursuit of this Jewish Messiah. And polytheism started crumbling. And over the next few hundred years, amazing things started happening. Yes, they were being persecuted, but the more they were being persecuted, the more faithful people would be, and the more people would come to the faith, because they could see that there was something different. People would, these Christians, they would take up abandoned babies, and no one before that would do it except for slavers, looking for cheap slaves, cheap source of income. I mean, look at the difference between before Jesus, before Yeshua, no one would go out of their way to help someone who wasn't a relative, and that's just the truth. No one would go outside of their people and help unless there was something in it for them. Yeshua changed that. People started picking up abandoned babies, not caring where they came from. People started, I mean, we see it today. People started building hospitals. People started going on dangerous journeys overseas just to tell people about Yeshua. People in the world not only gave up polytheism, but started caring about people who they had no reason to care for. The only way you can explain that is if, when we come to faith in Yeshua, or as I knew him, Jesus Christ, who saved my life, something happened. Something real happened. Because you look at the Muslims, and it's easy to convert someone into a religion where they say, okay, now you go out and kill everyone who doesn't believe. Well, that is a whole lot more palatable to the people of the world than, okay, now you believe, now you go out and die and suffer for them. You give up your money to help them. You suffer loss for people that you don't even know. See, that was unheard of in the ancient world. It was unheard of before the resurrection of Yeshua. And all of a sudden, the entire world changed. And other religions even sprang up that would take from that would take that altruism. But who do you think it started with? Jesus civilized the world. And there is really very little of it anymore that operates with the kind of attitude that existed before he came and before he died for us. All right? I absolutely encourage you to study ancient history. See how the people were. Study the sociology. And look at the difference between us and them. Is it because we're more evolved? No. Is it because we're more knowledgeable, because we have more technology? No. It's because of one thing and one thing only. And that is, when Jesus died, he destroyed the sting of death. The Romans put him to death in the most shameful, horrible way. And in the ancient world, that was proof of the absolute power of foreign kings to just make your life have been for nothing. And they got the last word. When he rose 3 days later, he said, they do not have the last word. I have the last word. God has the last word. Death, where is your sting? It's gone. And it wasn't just the idea of, well, now you're saved and you're going to go to heaven someday. It's no. What happened is that he made us a new creation in this life. And so we use this life to change the world now. He didn't die so we could go to heaven. He died so that we could be his ambassadors on earth now. We could live in a way that's different from everybody else. We could be selfless. We could be giving. We can show love, his love to the world. That is what he did. That's what he did. And the proof is all around us. Even with as terrible as the world is today, it's nothing compared to what it was before he died. I wish I could express to you how different the world is now. And it's all him. 100% him. He changed everything. So Anyway, I just want to share that with you this morning, and we will be back. I think I'll still record another teaching on Judean geography this week because I got my PowerPoints done. But just wanted to give you that. Yes, Yeshua is real. We can't deny it because we can see the people around us doing things for others that never would have been done before he came. Anyway, have a wonderful week. I love you. I'm praying for you, and I hope you have a wonderful week studying the scriptures together as a family. And you know what? Get plugged in to the Messiah. He's more important than anything. He's more important than anything. We need to know about him. If someone died for me that was just like a normal Joe Blow, I'd find out about him. I'd want to know everything about him. Well, somebody did. And so I spend my life I want to exalt him. I want to study him. I want to understand everything he ever said, everything he ever lived. That's the focus of my life. And to exalt him and make him known so that you guys will be able to do the same. Anyway, I love you. Take care. Bye-bye.